And with that, I appreciate everyone coming, and I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, who's a great friend of mine. I just saw her recently. I think she travels the country speaking now, Brenna Galvin. So Brenna is an elder law attorney from Minnesota and also is a practicing death doula. And she's here to talk about us about her own caregiving journey, which she went through as a caregiver and how that happened. So we're very excited to have Brenna back again this year. Brenna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. It's so wonderful to have the opportunity to be with you remotely like this. I know it's hard when you're caregiving to get away or to take time to get education or the support you need. So for those of you who are in caregiving journeys right now, thank you for being courageous enough to take this time for you. I am going to just quick switch over to my presentation so you can see. And I want to start today with just kind of acknowledging that I don't think that my family or I did this all correctly when we went through it, but I'm hoping that some of the lessons that we learned can help you as you navigate care for the person that you love most. So one, just note that many of the pictures that you'll see today in my slides are either pictures of my family or pictures from trips that I took to kind of honor my dad after he died. And so I hope have that background as you look through this today. So just a little bit more about me. As Stephen said, I am an elder law attorney and death doula. I practice in the area of elder law, estate planning, life care planning. And I became trained as a death doula because I felt like my clients had a gap in their care at the end of their life. I felt ill-equipped as an attorney to help them navigate really the final stages of their life. We did a great job, I think, coordinating care for them along the way, making sure they had essential legal documents. But I felt like when my clients entered the active dying process or when their families were trying to navigate that, we didn't really know how. And so I started Inspired Departures with another friend of mine who's a death doula as well. So we could practice and explore how we could provide more resources to people at the end of their life. And so a lot of the educational events that Stephen mentioned that I do are with that mission in mind. We really think that by beginning to welcome death or acknowledge death in our lives, we begin to live more fully with our present selves now. But today I get to take off my normal blazer that I have on and speak to you really as a daughter and a caregiver. This is my dad and I at my dad's parents' house in northern Indiana. I think by the pies, it was Thanksgiving, so around this time in the late 80s. My dad is the person that I had the closest relationship to, but also he was the person that made me a caregiver. Okay, so I had an active role in helping plan for his parents and my mom's parents, but this was the first time I had to take off the hat as daughter and kind of start in that caregiving role. I always think that it's important to realize, and I'm going to just switch the screen because some of this formatting is a little odd here, but we'll make it through. But I have heard this quote time and time again, and it really resonates with me that Rosalind Carter said it best when she said, there's just four types of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers in the future, and those who will need caregivers. And that just drives home how ubiquitous it is to care for someone that you love, or to be someone that will need care in the future. This drives is personal to all of us, even though I'm the one with the mic today sharing my story. So what we thought through when Stephen and I were first talking about what the vision was for this event and how I could help, or whether I could help in it some way. We wanted to be sure that there's a plan and a caregiver support system in place. We found that that's really the biggest takeaway that we can provide to each and every one of you. And I just want to share, the realities of caregiving challenges that we ran into and how we overcame them, whether we did, in hopes that you'll have be able to learn from that and really change your journey as well. And then I just want to speak a little bit to how there are documents that matter in doing all this. That's probably my lawyer hat coming on, but there are critical documents such as powers of attorney and healthcare directives that people need in order to be able to best help your loved one. So as we approach this, it's good to recognize that, and again, this is from a perspective of a death doula and looking back at my journey as a caregiver for my dad at the end of his life. I know not all of you have death approaching for the person that you love, but I think it's important context for us to recognize that there's really four ways that we die. Okay, so we fall within one of these patterns. One is sudden death. This is the rarest kind, and we often all hope for it. When I talk with my clients, they're like, I just hope that I fall asleep and don't wake up one day, or I hope that I'm hit by the bus, somebody takes me out back, that I don't want to live in this arena. However, that's really rare, and it's especially rare as people age. There's another type called, a short period of evident decline, and that's where my journey with my family went. My dad had esophageal cancer, and so from start of symptoms until death was less than 2 years. Some of us have long-term limitations with intermittent serious episodes. And what I mean by this is really times where it's common in organ failure. It's also common with certain types of dementia, like vascular dementia, where somebody is declining more slowly, but they have little dips that get worse, and then they continue their decline. Little dips worsen. And then how the majority of people who are aging pass away is through frailty or prolonged dwindling. This helped me conceptualize, what I was seeing with my clients and how different diagnoses and may impact the journey that they experience. I hope that information is helpful to you as well. And as I said, my journey with my family was one of short-term illness. Many of you are going, as caregivers, have the benefit and burden of longer journeys, or longer road trips in this case. So my family's journey, I was looking through as I was preparing to speak with you all about what this really looked like for us, and tried to put this all into a timeline. And it was really interesting. You know, what our memories aren't always the best keepers, but in the age of digital technology, I had tons of photos and text messages and emails back and forth to my family. For some context, I live in Minneapolis. I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin, where my mom, dad, and sister still resided, and it's that's it for our immediate family, the four of us, and all of our extended family was in predominantly Indiana. And so our extended family, as far as siblings or support systems for my dad, were further away. And was a 4.5 hour drive. So it wasn't like I was close. So we had to figure out ways that I could help from afar for a portion of the journey until I temporarily moved home to help care for him. But my dad's journey with esophageal cancer started in 2019. He was he was diagnosed after experiencing some issues swallowing. So he actually drove himself to the doctor after having multiple meals in a row where he felt like he was choking. He didn't tell any of us. He just drove into urgent care, asked if he could see his primary doctor, which, as many of you know, they don't they don't um, they don't offer when you're entering through urgent care. And he noticed he was losing weight really because of his difficulties eating. He knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. And in a small town like where I grew up in, there weren't a ton of resources. You drove to the next biggest town for urgent care. You drove about an hour away to either Madison or Milwaukee for a big hub where was more cancer care offered. But I was reading an email my dad sent, and I'll share it with you. Hello, brothers and sisters, in-laws, and other good friends. I have some holiday tidings from my family that are not so great, but far from insurmountable. I've been diagnosed with stage 2 esophageal cancer, a tumor in the throat area. It's been interfering with my ability to swallow, and I've been losing weight, maybe a good thing. The progress for recovery is relatively high, but I'll have to undergo a 3-pronged approach to dealing with this. The 3 steps to treatment are radiation, chemotherapy, and then surgery. I will have about 25 radiation therapy sessions, 4 chemo treatments, and then about 6 weeks later, a major surgery to remove a section of my esophagus and move my stomach up and attach it to the remaining portion of my esophagus. I'm anticipating 5 to 7 days in the hospital and a couple weeks at home. No big deal. I'm being treated at the University of Wisconsin Cancer Center, a highly regarded medical research facility, and the doctors have been great. I've had many tests, all kinds of scans and biopsies. I start my radiation on Monday. They will be daily, and there are some conflicts with the holidays that may limit our ability to travel at Christmas. We'll miss seeing everyone this year. The situation has also limited my ability to get home and take a turn with caregiving for mom. I do not think that mom needs to hear about this, as I don't want her to worry. She has enough going on. The rest of you are doing a great job with helping her. You're all great. To Kathy's family, that's my mom, don't spend time worrying about me, as I'm still young, strong, and resilient. You have plenty on your plate helping your mom and dad. Everything will work out fine, just gonna take some time. We are really gonna miss our 2 months in Mexico, but looking forward to a wonderful Wisconsin winter and Mexico next year. Wisconsin winters are really not that great. This email was sent by my dad in December of 2019 after having been diagnosed about 4 months earlier. He had not shared with his siblings or his parents or my mom's parents his diagnosis for many months, as he didn't feel like he had enough information, and was really concerned, as you could tell from the tone of his email, about everyone worrying or becoming a burden on them. as you can tell as well from that, the initial diagnosis and treatment plan was optimistic. What we didn't know what would follow. My dad went from kind of a big rugby player, party kind of a guy who was the life of the party in every room, loved to share jokes and tell stories, to someone that was truly a fraction of himself, but still, he was still there. He was still him. He was still a person who had likes and dislikes and wanted to care for others, even as he was dying in his hospital bed at home. Our journey was not easy, as he had a pretty rigorous treatment plan. The treatments actually became more aggressive as they progressed than what he anticipated. He went through those rounds of radiation and then additional chemotherapy than they initially thought. But his body was really significantly weakened by the care plan, as what happens with many of our clients and loved ones who go through cancer care. And one thing that we experienced was a delay in kind of, because he wasn't doing well, the treatments went longer than anticipated. And he went into the hospital for his surgery in March of 2020. Many of you will remember, and some of you were attended my presentation at this conference last year when I shared how difficult that was to navigate during the COVID pandemic. We dropped my dad off with a suitcase on the curb for a surgery to remove this segment of his esophagus. And that was an incredibly hard thing to do. And during that time, there were not as many care providers in the hospital available to help surround him. There was still a lot that wasn't known about the pandemic. Everyone was in medical care was in masks and shields. A lot of the physical, occupational speech therapists had been sent home initially as non-essential before they were brought in, back in. And my dad ended up, they anticipated him being in the hospital for 1 week. He was in the hospital for 21 days. And the only reason he was discharged home was because of what they called failure to thrive. For those of you who haven't heard of that term, failure to thrive is something that happens when a patient or a person starts deteriorating and they lose weight, they're depressed, they don't seem to be getting better. It's common in children that have experienced trauma, neglect. It's also common in seniors who aren't getting the care that they need, or people like my dad who was hospitalized for a long time with no real access to family to come in. And during his surgery, they hit his vocal cords a little bit. So while we had taught and practiced with him how to use an iPad and other things, he was not able to speak very clearly with us on the phone. So the days during that process were very long. And unfortunately, when he was discharged home with a feeding tube and really complex care needs, he entered this period where we were in and out of hospitalization, in and out of rehab facilities. And that went on from approximately April of 2020 when he was discharged until about August of that time. And we were the lucky ones during the pandemic because my sister is an RN with a specialty in geriatrics, and she was the director of nursing at a skilled nursing home that had a TCU, or a transitional care unit. So even though my dad was in a facility for a portion of the time, she was able to still see him or reach out to him during those periods. I share all this just because I want you to know that we had lots of choices to make during that period about where he would live, where he would receive care and support, what providers would be tapped into. We had also really struggled with figuring out how to satisfy his goals of being at home and having the limited amount most care possible with kind of our needs as well. And the complexity of his care made it difficult for us always to honor his wish to stay at home. That is until the end. So after we went through all of that experience, and after his surgery, they did a 6-month scan to determine how things were healing and whether the cancer was where it was in his body or if it was in remission. And at that 6-month scan in September of 2020, we were told that the cancer was back and it was in his bones. It was spread throughout his body, and he was no longer at stage 2. He was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer. At that point, the doctors did talk with us about the moving from aggressive cancer care treatment to palliative care and hospice. That was also the moment that I changed my work schedule. We were working remotely due to the pandemic, which enabled me to move and relocate to Wisconsin for the remainder of my dad's life. And during that time, my schedule was like I would get up early, meet with clients in the morning or do client work, eat a quick lunch, work out, go relieve my mom starting at about 1:30 p.m. and be with my dad until he was ready for bed at about 9:30. And then the process continued. During this time, there were lots of lessons that I learned, and some of them were things that I would say are do's and others that are do nots. I think that when we have the benefit of looking back on a situation, sometimes, whereas when we're in the middle of it, it's hard for us to come up for air, to evaluate things clearly, to think like I do it in my professional capacity for me when it was very personal. So one of the things that did work is us utilizing a team approach. On this Zoom, you'll see my sister, my mom, and dad as we were awaiting his doctor to join us to talk about palliative care treatment and what that looks like. These wonderful women, my mom and my sister and I, kind of made up the core of our care team, and we all acted or took point as caregivers at different parts of the journey. My mom was there through all of it, but was incredibly overwhelmed at the end after we got the diagnosis and really laden with anticipatory grief. That's when I would say I took the lead. And earlier on in the journey, when my dad was in and out of hospitalization and rehab, my sister, as a nursing background, really helped with those more complex care needs. I remember my dad saying at one point when he looked around at the three of us doing different things, my mom is a retired teacher and professor, and she was taking notes from providers, and there were all these ledger pads on top of each other, or not ledger pads, either legal pads or steno pads that were stacked up with her diligent notes about what we should be doing at what time. My sister with the RN background and myself as an elder law attorney and death doula, my dad said, "Look at me, how did I get so lucky?" And we felt lucky too to have that ability to use that background to give him the best end of life and death that we could imagine. Now, while this were our immediate caregivers, I can tell you that this is not enough for the journey. You know, you as the caregiver play such a critical and important role, and we just want to be sure that you have the help you need. And when I think back to who supported us during our journey, it was a huge team of elder law attorneys, care coordinators, financial advisors, accountants, family caregivers, healthcare providers, spiritual care. One thing that's just some background about my dad, he was not somebody who went to a church or a synagogue, but at his end of life, he really wanted or sought out that sort of care. And so he had a friend and a chaplain who really were able to give him some of that care that he was seeking. A death doula, a psychologist, I can tell you that I really relied heavily on a therapist during this time to help me navigate these big feelings of loss, change in roles that we were experiencing, exhaustion, frustration, depression. And support groups. We didn't utilize this, and I wish we would have. Truly, as Franklin was sharing at the beginning, we've heard from people, or this might have been from a rerun from last year's session, but we've heard from clients and other people that support groups might be just a time where they have people kvetch, but really it's a time for people to get education, to be uplifted, and to hold kind of hands together to navigate what's really an impossible journey to do on your own. Community support. So we, as I mentioned, grew up in a small town, and my dad was very heavily involved in the community. And wow, did people show up through either bringing meals to calling and checking in, to sending messages when we couldn't reach out, to just say that they loved us and they were here whenever we needed them. And then a mortician or funeral celebrant as well. You know, I think about this as a personal board of directors. Sorry about that. These are the people that will help connect you to the resources you need and provide really the holistic care you need as a caregiver. I mentioned the steno pads that my mom had. This is one of them. My dad, because he was on a feeding tube and couldn't swallow, a lot of his, all of his medications had to be administered through the tube and had to be timed out. So we just had pad after pad of timing, notes from the hospice providers as well. I really would encourage each and every one of you to get organized and empowered. And some of that is through really, I think, keeping a journal or sitting down and talking through with your loved one what they understand their diagnosis is and their prognosis in their terms, if they're able to communicate that with you. How it's showing up in their lives, how does it impact them? Truly, what does it mean for their day-to-day? And then thinking through what their wishes are as far as their goals. This isn't just care or treatment goals. This is really what they want to be able to do with their loved ones at the end of their life, if that's where you are on your journey. And what does this mean for how your action, as far as if your goal is to be at home as much as possible and the treatment will result in you being hospitalized, what are you willing to give up, or what are you willing to do? How do you negotiate the care plan with the person's wishes? That exercise really helped us, and we used it multiple times throughout our journey. The second thing that I would say about getting organized is really about the legal documents that helped. So as you know from me sharing, my mom was kind of the point person, the primary caregiver, and we were all secondary. And that is also how my parents' estate planning documents were set up. Common, right? Spouse might be in the primary role as the power of attorney or attorney in fact, and the healthcare agent. But as my mom was really enmeshed in the caregiving for my dad, she wanted me to be able to start making calls to the long-term care insurance provider, to the accountant, to the bank to set things up in a certain way. And I was listed as the backup person. So mom was primary, I was secondary. And this became an issue, right? When I called and they'd say, "Who are you? You're not Tim Galvin. You're not Kathy Galvin. You don't have authority to talk to us about this account." This is something that many of our caregivers go through when they don't have the right legal documents set up. It's sometimes something that they go through even when they do. My mom and dad had planned for a period where my dad might become incapacitated, but they hadn't thought about the practical, how are we going to use this? And will the caregivers that we need for each of the jobs be able to do the thing we want them to do at the time? So one thing I talk to my clients about is not only having kind of a primary or secondary, but depending on their care team and who's going to be supporting them through their journey, we also talk about, does this person need to be in a primary role as well? Do we need a special authorization sign to make sure that they can communicate on your behalf and make those decisions? It's really important to create a one-stop shop for yourself because it is very difficult. And I know even though my mom took great notes on these steno pads, one of the things that was really challenging is that she had all these notes and would have to like page through to figure out, oh, this is the new medication course, or we now need to administer this additional drug at this time. Or let's see if we can find in our emails the contact information for this provider. And how do we look in our My Chart or our electronic medical record for data and information? It sometimes felt very hard to have or put our hands on the information when we needed them, or needed it most. And so when I talk to clients, I really do think about creating this one-stop shop of the legal documents that will help support them, like powers of attorney, healthcare directives, estate planning documents like wills or trusts, the financial information about where things are and how the accounts are titled, and the medical information about diagnosis, provider contact information, medication chart, those things, keeping it together. Many of my caregivers that come to see me in my office have, like a tote bag, or even some of them have a binder, some of them have a whole storage cart, bin, luggage with because they're trying to make sure that they have all documents available when they need it. Excuse me. The other thing that I want to talk with you about is having courageous conversations. So, one of the biggest gifts that I think we got was a doctor who was willing to talk with us openly about my dad's prognosis and what this meant for him, and how, especially when cancer moves, as my dad's did, from the into the bones, how that could be very painful. And that was one of the most difficult conversations I've had in my life, and been a part of, but it also created all of this room for us by us acknowledging the reality of the situation, by us understanding what was to come. We could begin to really talk openly about the things that mattered most to my dad and us as a family. I wanted to include, there's this great study that was done where they interviewed a group of death doulas from all over the country, and they asked them, what did a good death look like? And there were really 4 themes that emerged. The themes were no pain. So people who are dying, if their pain is managed, that would equate to a good death. No loss in the dignity of the body. So sometimes, as we know, as our loved ones lose their either mental capacity or they lose their physical abilities, they do feel this loss of dignity, a loss of autonomy. And so thinking through ways for how we can preserve that autonomy, acknowledge it, is really important. Feeling surrounded by love is another one. And having a legacy, meaning as they approach going from this life into their death, they want to know that they've made an impact, or they've left something, their life has mattered in this world. And we got to have really, really deep conversations with my dad, and that is something that I credit largely to a healthcare provider that was willing to be open with us about the reality of the situation, and that enabled us to be open with each other. Now, I think it's possible for you guys to have courageous conversations with the people you love in your family without a healthcare provider. Sometimes it's harder to find that opening. And so I hope that you will be bold enough to have those courageous conversations. And I'll give you an example of one. The Thanksgiving prior to my father dying, there was only about 10 days between Thanksgiving and his death, maybe less than a week. As I mentioned, my memory about these dates has gotten a little hazy as time's gone on. At that time, he was still, of course, not able to eat or drink, and he loved cooking Thanksgiving. That was his holiday. And something he let us do or encouraged us to do was for each of us to take a portion of the items that he cooked and make them and help guide us through those recipes and those, to be honest, I had never made gravy before. I got to learn how to make my my dad's gravy. And he really encouraged us to keep on the tradition without him in a different way. And then when we sat down at the Thanksgiving table and we went around, we were going to go around to share what we were grateful for. My dad took the time to tell each and every one of us at the table how proud he was of us, how much being a father and a grandfather and a spouse has meant to him, and how um, it he felt like he through his death was able to really see the wonderful legacy he was leaving in each one of us behind. And to be able to hear those words and hear that was something that I feel very lucky for. I know not all of us have loved ones with capacity at the end of their lives who are able to share that, but to be able to know it and feel it is something that was really important. I also would encourage you all to establish a self-care practice. I am notoriously bad at this, but for some reason or another, I think after my dad was diagnosed, I really needed an outlet to physically get out of my head and into my body and away from just thinking only about work, the magnitude of care that we needed to coordinate and provide. And I relied on my Peloton at the time. Even when I moved from Minnesota to Wisconsin, I brought it with me. And that's because I knew that I had to feel strong physically and mentally for what we were going through. My dad was a large man, and even as his body changed, moving him was sometimes difficult, and I wanted to feel like I could help him with some of those tasks and support him through that. But if you don't want to establish a crazy workout regimen, I would encourage you to still find other ways that you can put your mask on before putting the mask on of the person you're supporting. And some examples of this are through, setting boundaries. It's really difficult when you are someone who gives so freely of yourself and your time to care for others, to remember that during a time when you're running short. I always think of it as your bucket is really full right now as caregivers, and any additional little things could spill over and leave you with really no capacity or no room. And we need to create room in your bucket so you can be well, so you don't experience bad health consequences as a result of this. So figuring out ways to set boundaries, trying to balance professional and personal demands. This was really hard for me. I was one of the partners at the law firm at the time this happened, and I felt like it was going to be very difficult to step away from clients or step away from the capacity I normally worked at to take this time. But I knew at the time that that was the right thing to do for myself and my family, that I wouldn't regret having the time. And so, I was lucky to be the employer but my partners and I talked about what this looked like and how we could balance the demands of my practice with my personal needs to be available to care for my dad. The other thing is taking breaks or time off. There were days where my mom, sister, and I coordinated where I wouldn't have to go over each day, or my mom could leave to, she has a wonderful group of women that she's known for many of years that are a part of a book group or a book club. And while she hadn't had time to read the book, she was still able to participate, and they welcomed her to come so she could get away and have that respite. Getting sleep. If you are like me, your anxiety might interfere with good quality sleep, but it's going to be really important for you to get at least 6 hours each night to give your body what it needs to keep going. Moving your body. So I mentioned my Peloton workouts during this time of caregiving, but I also want to say that um, you don't need to do something like that. You can go for a walk. And my parents, where I grew up, has the largest freshwater marsh in North America. So for all of you across the country, you've got to visit the Horicon Marsh sometime in your lives, especially if you like watching birds. And so I went for walks in the marsh and around the marsh regularly during that fall. I found it meditative to hear the migrating birds over, flying over, and to just tap into nature and ground myself in that. And um, I know that this is something that I really recognized that fall, that our lives are cyclical, nature is cyclical, and kind of being out during a season where we were moving into the winter helped ground me and prepare me for what was to come for my dad. Engaging with friends, family, and your support systems. Sometimes I felt, and I can be honest about this, that I didn't feel like a fun hang during this period. I felt like what was happening was so challenging for me, and there was so much loss going on in my life. I really was concerned that no one would want to be around me at this period. But the reality is, we feel really great when we can help a friend in need, or to be able to listen to someone who's going through something difficult. And it's human nature that we want to connect. And so I would encourage you to be vulnerable with the people that love you and want to be there to support you. You don't need to ask them for help. You may need to ask them for help, but you do need to have an outlet. And I really encourage you to find professional support when that's needed as well. Caregiving, some of you may have heard this before, is a lot like being a frog in boiling water. So I have never tested this theory, just to be to be frank, but they say that if you put a frog into water that's already boiling, it will jump out. And if you instead start the water as temperate and slowly turn up the heat until it boils, the frog will not jump out and die there. And I think about this a lot as we talk with our families that we're supporting through their caregiver journey. Many of us end up in a place that we wouldn't, if we dove into the deep end, we wouldn't even be able to last, a day, or if we knew from the onset what we were getting into or what would transpire, it would feel too much for us to bear. But instead, often our journeys start slow and heat up over time. And it's really difficult for us to have that perspective or knowledge to get out and save ourselves. But it's a critical thing to do. There were a lot of challenges in our journey, and one of the big ones was navigating our new roles. So, um, whenever a child becomes a caregiver for a parent, this can be really difficult because, as Franklin shared in the video when we started this morning, you know, we are often deferential to our parents. We look to them to be the decision makers, and then we fall in line. At least that's how it was in my family. Um, and I would just say that one of the things that I found challenging about this was that we were navigating new roles in our relationship as, care partners, caregiver, care receiver, um, parent child, um, and new roles within our family system without my dad at the head of the table, figuring out um, where we all fit together as a unit was challenging at times, and still, to be honest, in our grief is. And we have never really had open conversations about those new roles. And I think it would have helped if we did. And we acknowledged it was difficult for my dad to have to or need to um, change. And it would be difficult for um, my sister and I to navigate these differences in our skills and talents and gifts as far as how we care for him, and difficult to watch my mom as her capacity to make decisions really changed, through the stress and grief. I would encourage you to acknowledge when those changes are happening, to know it's normal for them to happen, and to seek support, and to be open with your loved ones. The other thing that was really challenging and remains challenging in my life is just the ongoing trauma and grief care. As caregivers, sometimes we watch our loved ones go through very traumatic experiences as they die, and we also are experiencing anticipatory grief about the losses that our loved ones facing, as well as um, actually experiencing the post-death grief of their physical loss in this world. And I found that, the way our society is set up is that we don't like to speak about grief or to say that we're grieving before someone dies, because we don't want to talk about the death, or we don't want to acknowledge the vast changes that our loved one is facing. And so sometimes that grief we're experiencing before the death is dealt with alone. And after someone dies, our society is really set up to help you, support you through a funeral or memorial or celebration of life. And then everyone's back to business as usual. And I can tell you that I didn't feel like it was back to business as usual. And in fact, I've told multiple friends this year that it's been, well, in December, it will be 3 years. And this year was the first year I felt like my energy was resuming to the levels that it was before my dad started his dying process. That's a long time, and it's something that people are uncomfortable talking about or getting help for, and it's not something that our society naturally provides us support in. So I would really encourage you to know that it's important to get ongoing care for those experiences. I'm going to share with you something I wrote in as we wrap up today. This is something that I wrote to put context to, you know, his passing in the weeks immediately past. People say, I don't want you to remember him like this. I do. I do want to remember him like this. I want to remember it all. To remember him as he laid there and told me he was beginning to look like the Body Worlds exhibit that I begged him to take me to, all bone and sinew. The feeling of little tumors that lined his tibia and femur. The color of the scar that stretched across his belly or the balloon of his hernia. The sound of the clipper against his brittle toenails and the rattle of the cough in his chest. The smell of the scented garbage bags that lined his spit bin when he could no longer swallow. I want to remember how it felt to hug him when I could no longer hug him without abandon, when I had to balance the desire to embrace him hard, but not hard enough to worsen the hurt. And oh, did he hurt. I want to remember the warmth of his presence when he invited me to come back and lay in his hospital bed with him. Or the weight of my chest as I watched my mom crying over a coffee cup, with the understanding of how her heart ached for him then, and the foresight to know it would again. I want to remember it all. Because before he was dust, he was so much more than just bone and sinew. The truth is that caring for my dad made up some of the most tender moments of my life, as well as some of the worst moments of my life. And it's not one or the other as we approach our caregiving journeys. It's both and. So with that today, I want to thank you all for allowing me to share my family's story with you. And I hope that some of the trials and tribulations and triumphs that we experience can help you as you're navigating your caregiving journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brenna. We greatly appreciate your giving us that personal story and, you know, giving us all the things. I know I've gone through some stuff. You and I've talked about it. Like, everyone has their own caregiver journey. We all have to transition through it. So we appreciate that. So thank you, Brenna.